nerds, what's up? So I do feel like we've endlessly been talking recently about whether or not you should support an author's works when you disagree with them. And I think this kind of really hit the fan with J.K. Rowling's tweets back in 2020. By the way, time is a lie. That was only 3 years ago. It feels like I've lived 3 lifetimes since those tweets. But anyway, I don't want to talk about Joe today. Joe's been talked about enough. My slightly new angle on this was actually inspired by the recent Wired article written by Brandon Sanderson. Now, there's already been a lot of discourse on that, and you can look to other people's great videos on that commentary. Mine is actually about a very specific thing said at the beginning of this article. On the day of his record-breaking Kickstarter campaign, 42 million of that 55 million, I came to the Wired offices ready to gossip. How'd he do it? Why now? Is Brandon Sanderson even a good writer? Nobody had the first clue who or what I was talking about. On the one hand, who cares? Sanderson has millions upon millions of fans all over the planet. It doesn't matter that some losers at a single magazine, even if it is one of the nerdier ones, had never heard of him. On the other, the ignorance goes far beyond Wired. As far as I can tell, Sanderson, who has been topping bestseller lists for the better part of the 21st century, has not been written about in any depth by any major publication ever. Gosh. Forcing myself to read that article again is painful because it reminds me of what a garbage really written article that is, but that's besides the point. I am intrigued by this idea, even if we shouldn't take the rest of the article seriously. How come authors who seem to be very famous and doing very well aren't really like typical celebrities? Because here's the thing, fantasy authors are relatively unknown. And I wondered how that might play into this whole argument about supporting authors when we don't agree on their views. How much do people actually know about what is going on? That, combined with some recent comments I've been getting on my YouTube channel, has birthed this video. So today, let's talk about what responsibility, if any, readers have to research authors before they read their books. Let's talk about whether only good people make good art. Let's talk about how the internet plays a role in all of this. Let's talk about our individual hypocrisy when it comes to things like this. And let's talk about how, unlike other celebrities, authors may fall into a slightly different category. I'm really conflicted on this topic, so join me in the journey. I'll see you after the jump. One thing I find fascinating to talk about is the relatively less fame authors have when compared to other celebrities, and especially when we niche down to fantasy authors. Other celebrities are often famous from their looks, like they have a visual representation of them, actors and musicians, and authors, on the other hand, generally are known more by their words. There is an easy chance you may be surprised at what an author looks like. You may never have seen a photo of them. You may only know their name. Or even further of that, sometimes works, their titles are the most famous thing and people can't even name who they're by. They are more known by the title of the work. To test this theory a little bit, I tried to think of fantasy authors that were household names. Now, to be a household name, it means everybody has to know who you are. Not just people who read, not just people who read fantasy, but a general person, even if they don't engage with any of the art. I came up personally with 4 names, that being J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, J.K. Rowling, and George R.R. Martin. Now, George R.R. Martin is a little bit uneven on that list. I don't think maybe they're quite as household as the other 3, but I think with the ginormous crossover success of Game of Thrones, he is getting there. I did also think briefly of Stephen King, who clearly is a household name, but I wasn't sure if he was fantasy enough since I view him more as a horror and thriller author, so I kept him off my list. Now, to do a very unofficial, very bad statistical analysis of this, since I only asked 2 people, I asked 2 people in my life who I consider very general public and know pretty much nothing about fantasy. The first being my mom. I was super surprised and pleased when my mom said 3 of the 4 I had immediately come up with, and you'll notice she also said Stephen King, not sure where he went. When I asked her about if she had heard of George R.R. Martin, she was able to come up with the name Game of Thrones, even though she thought it was a movie and not a TV show. My cousin, who isn't a huge reader, actually really couldn't name anybody when I asked her who a fantasy author was, except Ironically, one person I hadn't heard of because her friend had just recently read him. But when I asked her about Tolkien and J.K. Rowling, she did say she knew who J.K. Rowling was, but said that Tolkien only sounded familiar in name to her, and she had no idea who George R.R. Martin was. But then I did it further. And interestingly enough, when I asked her, do you know what Lord of the Rings is and Game of Thrones? In an almost offendedly joking way, I don't live under a rock. Of course I know what the Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones are. Again, more proof that the title of a work often outlasts the author. I was actually shocked that she only vaguely recognized the name Tolkien. I do still think he's a household name. The point of all this, I think, as a book community, if you're here, if you are watching BookTube, if you are reading a ton of books every year, you are more in the pulse than a vast majority of the people. I'll make a claim that's not substantiated, but a claim I feel decently confident about, that probably the majority of everyday regular readers aren't that keyed in to authors in general. I think we have a distorted perception of the fame of these authors because we ourselves are very much within the book community. So what does that mean for this wider argument? What it means is I don't think many people even know the views of authors. I think when people interact with books and honestly any media, movies, music, TV shows, just plain old artwork, they aren't really thinking of the creator behind it a lot of the times unless they get really into it. In fact, I did decide to poll you guys, my subscribers, a few days ago, who I view as to be more clued in, to ask you guys about how much you research authors before getting into a book. And even among the book crowd, it was only an 80-20 split, with 80% of you saying that you don't generally purposefully research an author before reading their book. Many of you said it might happen accidentally as you're a part of the book community. You kind of by osmosis learn some things. Some people said you had come across interviews and it made you like an author enough to try picking up their books. But many of you said that you didn't research an author until after you already had fallen in love with one of their works. Now, I totally identify with this because when I love something, then I feel like I have to fall down a rabbit hole and look everything up about it for the most part. But this complicates it. It's an important distinction. Because once you're already in love with a work, finding out retroactively that an author sucks makes it even that much harder and more painful to make a decision about how you want to treat that work. It's one thing to find something out about an author before you've started their works and think, well, I guess I'm just not going to read that now. And it's a completely other thing to find that out after you have fallen in love with said work. I feel like every video I do these days is like the internet. But it's true, the internet has drastically changed how we interact with people and interact with things. And obviously, although the internet isn't new anymore, in the grand scheme of things, when we look at history, the way we interact with the internet is extremely young, and the internet exasperates these issues. Before we were on social media and had everything at our fingertips with Google or whatever, finding out about an author's views was probably going to be a lot harder. You might read an op-ed piece of theirs or an acknowledgement page in the book. Maybe there was an interview in a newspaper or a TV show that you sought out or you just happened upon. In general, though, we weren't hearing as much from authors. There wasn't Twitter. There wasn't Reddit AMAs. Now you might come across author information that isn't even purposeful. You might just happen upon it while you're looking for something else, or you're looking up the bibliography of an author and articles pop up. It's important to just insert this small aside here because we really have to understand that this kind of problem we're talking about is relatively young in the grand scheme of things, and it may be why we feel so conflicted about it, because it hasn't been around long enough, I think, for us to really establish what it means for us moving forward. Which brings me to the main question. What is a reader's responsibility? How much responsibility do we have as readers to investigate an author before we pick up their works? To vote with our money? To make it known once we find out about an author? So let's break that down because those questions are very different. And the first thing we're gonna address, and it may be really controversial that I say this, but I don't think the reader has a responsibility to vet every author they read before they pick up a book. The same way I don't really expect anyone to look up every actor or producer or someone involved in every movie and media and music piece they enjoy. Sometimes we're just gonna consume things. And I'm just gonna be honest here, and I'm not gonna put on airs. One of the main reasons is I don't is because I think it would just be a really exhausting way to live my life. If I had to do a deep dive on every piece of media I picked up, every book I saw on a list or someone recommended to me, it would be too tiring. And I know people can come for me and say things like, well, it's your duty, it's your responsibility to be like a good consumer. And I understand that, I do. But I think that it's not sustainable. Okay, but now what about after you know? What about you've already read the book and you happen across this information? For me, I feel like this question in some ways is even more important, or anyone who's watching this who is also a reviewer in any sort of public way. Sure, it's not like I'm some massive influencer, but I do recommend things and I probably have caused people to buy things. So where is my responsibility in that pipeline? And here's actually where I think J.K. Rowling is a less interesting example, because Harry Potter is household name. Harry Potter is so huge. There is no way anyone's giving publicity to Harry Potter at this point. I'm just gonna say it. You're not, well, they wouldn't have known about Harry Potter if you didn't talk about it. Please. That's why I think other lesser known books are more interesting, and why it's important to talk about how the relative fame of fantasy authors isn't very famous. Even relatively famous people within the fantasy community, like Orson Scott Card, a lot of people might not know about. And a more interesting one for me recently, which is where I've gotten some comments on, is my recent love for the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy by Cixin Liu. I knew nothing about Cixin Liu. I picked that book up, honestly, just because I had decided to read all of the 2010s Hugo winners for a video. I knew nothing about him. I tore through the trilogy, absolutely fell in love with it. You guys have heard me recommend it multiple times. I have since found out that he has said some very, very bad, evil things. So now what? Should I not talk about that trilogy anymore? Should I always put a caveat when I do talk about it and recommend that people either get it from the library or borrow it from a friend and don't give money to that? Should I just talk about it and let other people make their own decision, or just not know about it, ignorance is bliss, like I had? The problem I run into here is twofold. First, I sometimes worry about coming off hypocritical if I start making comments about some books and not others, because I've only come across the author's views for a couple of these books. So I might start putting a little caveat as I talk about them, like Cixin Liu going forward. But then what if someone's like, well, you didn't make a little mention of this book. Did you know this? And you should have. And does that mean you agree with this person? Like, sometimes I worry that by not making a statement for everyone, then some people will think I agree with something I don't even know I'm agreeing to. Does that make sense? That's where that exhausting part comes in. And where do I draw the line? How deep do I go? How much is enough to comment on? Some of these people seem very obvious to comment on, like Cixin Liu, but it might not always be obvious. And do I only talk about living authors and not dead authors because only the estate's getting the money? Of course, most of us, I'd say a majority of us, are all a little hypocritical. I'm sure we all shop at places that have business models we don't agree with, sometimes for convenience. I still watch Lord of the Rings. Everyone still watches Lord of the Rings and recommends that people watch them. Did y'all know that Harvey Weinstein was a producer on Lord of the Rings? None of us are saying to boycott Lord of the Rings. Now, of course, this is obviously a little bit of a disingenuous comparison, and I know that. Someone bringing a producer on the project is very different than an author who is the sole arbiter of the project. But we're here for sometimes exaggeration. We will always probably be walking contradictions, and the question I have is, where do I take a stand and where don't I? Am I gonna start doing it moving forward? Am I not? I don't know. I do really like what someone commented on my poll question. Thank you, Vez, who said, my stance as of now is that I have my personal crusades and boycotts that I care about more than others, which are naturally those that affect me more on a personal level. I'm of the opinion that it is normal that everyone has their own fight to fight, and trying to fight all of them only made me miserable, because with many issues, it sounds mean, but I just value my own entertainment more and downplay the impact my money makes. I really liked this because of the realness of it. I think we all feel that way sometimes, the overwhelm of having to know all the information when we just can't. And that's why for me, I think I need to focus on the actions I can make with what I do know and not worry about what I don't. The second thing I want to talk about in relation to this is based off comments I've gotten recently, and I wish I could find the comment, guys. I'm so sorry. I read it and didn't immediately screenshot it, and if I do that, the comment is lost to oblivion. I posted a video since then, and now it's lost. But the gist of the comment was basically, hey, Cixin Liu has said all of these terrible things, and you said his books changed your mind about the universe, you better think about that. You better think about what that means for you as a person. The implication being that I should maybe feel ashamed that I had my mind expanded by this series when the author is a bad person. Hey guys, Editing Bookborn here. I kind of got uncomfortable with how much I said bad person while watching this video back. Yes, I have made judgments about these authors based on things they have said themselves and things that I personally disagree with, but I do not know these authors personally, and so it was kind of making me uncomfortable how often I said bad person. Just know going forward in this video, I use that phrase a lot, but what I mean is authors who I have determined have views very different than mine and that I personally do not agree with. The implication is bad people can't make good art. Only good people make good art. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice if that's how the world worked? But it's not. Bad people make good advancements in technology, art, literature, and anything all the time. And truthfully, if we only wanted to consume art made by good people, we probably would be consuming very little. And maybe that comes off as an excuse, but it's something I actually sort of believe. And this is where the real meaning of death of the author comes to play. A lot of people think death of the author means what we're talking about previously, which is, should you care about the author in the work? No, death of the author really means, does it matter what their perspective and historical context means in relation to the book? Now, I do think that when you read a book and you don't know an author's opinions, you kind of form your own, you get your own thing out of it. I personally saw none of Cixin Liu's views in that book. Now, if I had read it after I knew his views, might I find something? Yeah, it's hard to tell if I reread it, if I'd feel differently. But it doesn't take away the experience I had the first time I read it, which was, mind expanding. And I can struggle with how I'm gonna deal with Cixin Liu going forward, but I'm not gonna pretend his series didn't have an impact on me, because it did, and that's the truth, and I thought it was good art, because sometimes good art comes from bad places. And I always laugh a little bit when information comes out about an author in a public way, and I see a lot of people go, oh, well, that book, that movie wasn't actually really good anyway. And you're like, well, maybe it was. We don't have to pretend it's not good just because we don't like what's come to light. Not always. I do really love this comment that someone left again on that poll that I wanted to highlight. Thank you, D-Muse. They said, interesting question. I'm an English professor, so I research the lives of the authors I teach. I want students to see how the authors' lives and culture may have impacted their works. However, I don't actively research authors whose works I read for fun. It didn't occur to me to find this odd until I read your post. Why do I feel knowing about an author is important for an academic setting, but not for my own personal enjoyment of a written work? I'll have to think on this one. I thought that was a great way to put it. I have to think on it too. I think it's a great question. I'd love to know your guys' comments below. I'm not gonna really elaborate on this, but one thing I will say is I do think a lot of these authors that are coming out now that we're having problems with are modern authors living in our modern world. And so we may feel like we do not need cultural or historical context for that because we are also living in that same time period. Whereas classic authors from a while ago, we may feel like we have a benefit from that. For some ending thoughts, I want to be clear. I never question when someone says they want to not read an author's work or they're boycotting it or they're not going to engage in that because of a personal stance. I never question it, and I don't think we should question it. This video is more to ask about how we're going to engage in those things moving forward and what it means for us. For me personally, I'll probably just keep reading books and deal with the fallout later. I think I may start trying to recommend to people to borrow books from the library or from other people if I find out something afterwards, but I will probably still be honest about the experience I had reading those books before I knew. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, I know this is a hard topic, and that's why I think discussing it is so beneficial. As always, thank you for watching my videos, and if you like these, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. If you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.